So please welcome Professor Sir Krista Freeman.
Ian Foster writes about what it was like to read T.S. Eliot at the time of the Great War. Foster. It was during the war that I first came across Mr. Eliot's work. It was Egypt, no danger or discomfort. Still, it was the war, and while waiting for while waiting for a tram in Cairo, I sprained my ankle upon the asphalt pavement and was carried into the garden of a friend. Literature was available. Huysmans' Al Rebour is the book of that blessed period that I remember best. Oh, the relief of a world which lived for its sensations and ignored the world of Dissent. Was it decadent? Yes, and thank God. Yes, here again was a human being who had time to feel and experiment with his feelings, to taste and smell, and arrange books and fabricate flowers, and be selfish and himself. And in the hasty, uncritical fashion of those days, I tacked on to Huysmans some poems which had come out in a sort of paperish volume from England, Prufrock, Portrait of a Lady, and a few more. The poems were not Epicurean, still they were innocent of public spiritedness. They sang of private disgust and diffidence, and the people seemed genuine because they were unattractive and poor. The author was irritated by tea parties and not afraid to say so, with the result that his occasional might have beens rang out with the precision of a gong. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silence. Here was a protest, and a feeble one, and the more congenial for being feeble. For what in that world of gigantic horror was tolerable except the slighter gestures of dissent? He who measured himself against the war, who drew himself up to his full height, as it were, and said to Armadillo Armageddon, a vaunt, collapsed at once into a pinch of dust. But he who had turned aside to complain of ladies and drawing rooms preserved a tiny drop of our self-respect. He carried on the human heritage. I think it's a very, very beautiful essay by Foster. And, as you know, Foster and Eliot had tangled and difficult and sometimes rather ugly relations. And Eliot received from Foster, I think, the most telling rebuke that he received from anybody at the time of the death of D.H. Lawrence. Extraordinarily beautiful submission by Foster. Now, I'm going to be talking about this poem and in a way the edition of it, and I hope therefore we will have a discussion because editing doesn't lend itself to simply a lecture. But the point that I want to make is that Foster is both tellingly right and importantly wrong in wishing the war not to be in these poems. That is, he wishes them not to be for these very good reasons, that to measure yourself against the war would have been hopeless and indeed intolerable, insufferable in its vaunting and so on. On the other hand, Mr. Apollinax is about submarine warfare. And that isn't something I had realized until Jim McCue and I started to edit the poem. Let me read you the poem and quote some things from my notes, and I hope that we'll move to a discussion with the poem. He must be unbalanced. He has no Greek. All right, I have no Greek. I have a son, therefore, who's a Greek scholar. It's a good idea to diverge from your parents in some way. But I remind you that what the Greek means is what novelty, what marvelous paradoxes, how inventive he is. The ways in which that does and does not fit Bertrand Russell, who from very, very early on was held to be the figure, intimated, caricature, shadow in Mr. Apollinax. So Mr. Apollinax, I read it. Okay. When Mr. Apollinax visited the United States, his laughter tinkled among the teacups. I thought of Frigilian, that shy figure among the birch trees, and of Priapus in the shrubbery, gaping at the lady in the swing. In the palace of Mrs. Flackers at Professor Channing Cheetah's, he laughed like an irresponsible fetus. His laughter was submarine and profound, like the old man of the seas, hidden under coral islands, where worried bodies of drowned men drift down in the green silence, dropping from fingers of surf. I looked for the head of Mr. Apollinax rolling under a chair or grinning over a screen with seaweed in his hair. I heard the beat of centaurs' hoofs over the hard turf as his dry and passionate talk devoured the afternoon. He's a charming man. But after all, what did he mean? His pointed ears. He must be unbalanced. There was something he said that I might have challenged. Of Dowager Mrs. Flackers and Professor and Mrs. Cheetah, I remember a slice of lemon and a bitten macaroon. Now, I think everything that Foster says about it is true. There is a wonderful sense of relief there, and so on. Except that from the beginning, as soon as you say, how did Mr. Apollinax visit the United States, it had to be not by aeroplane but by boat. And the word submarine, which I never take the full force of, reminds you that in 1915, this is a poem written in 1915, published in 1915, collected in 1917, 1915 fails to bring the United States of America into the war, despite the submarine attack that lost a lot of American lives, and despite the complications by which a civilian ship turns out really to be a strictly civilian ship because it is loaded with armaments and so on. So that whole complicated world of international mendacities. Fast forward to the Falkland War, or wherever you wish to go when it comes to the world of sinking great ships and the sense of collateral damage. So behind the line when Mr. Apollinax visited the United States, there has immediately to be some sense of what's to come. And then there's a lot about drowning in the poem. I feel it's kind of daft of me not to register this before, but we all read poems by delightedly returning to the things which always delighted us. And what always delighted me in this is this picture of Oxford and Cambridge, insufferably snobbish places, which one feels guilty about having really rather enjoyed. Sir Maurice and I were talking fluent French of some complication, 100 degree for Jean Cocteau. You creep up and you wonder what Sir Maurice, linguist beyond parallel, and so what he's actually saying. He's saying, splendid. Splendid. Oh, well, I could manage splendid. Fluent French and so on. So that whole world is very much the world of the fragments of conversation and the amazing self-righteousness of the people when there is a visiting professor. Well, I'm sorry. Take two. When someone. So when Mr. Apollinax visited the United States, is in touch with Professor Channing Cheetah. I mean, there are visitors and visitors, and he is, of course, Russell is, of course, a visitor at Harvard, where he meets the young Eliot, and I'll remind you of some of those facts. But what you got from the beginning is something which is much, much more dangerous, as well as... So it's as much in touch with the war as it's in touch with drawing rooms and people irritating you, and people being attractive because they're weak, and so on. I particularly like the whole line. If you think about how the conversation goes, he is a charming man, very, very dangerous about Russell, of course, who was, to many people's destruction. But after all, what did he mean? With mean doing a terrific work, isn't there? A whole philosophical seminar based on what do you mean by mean? What is the meaning of meaning? It's going to be a very important concern. His pointed ears, ... There's a new book on ellipsis which I'm looking forward to reading. I haven't yet read it. Ellipsis is immensely important. Larkin has lovely jokes about it. So when I was young, it meant soft porn. Again, that's for some of you. He undid her blouse. ... little buttons, these tiny little buttons and so on. Eliot, wonderful with ellipses, sort of groped his way, finding the stairs unlit. And you go ... Though Eliot had written the full line. very, very beautiful, was the amputation of a full line down to an ellipsis with this curious feeling. Well, it's difficult to use the word groping now in the present state of the American presidential campaign. He sort of groped his way finding the stairs under it's sort of part of the tenacity of an erotic scene that you've just witnessed and so on. So that half line, his pointed ears, ... You must be unbalanced. And the relation of your ears to your balance is, of course, a real point. I mean, you always feel just below the surface at ending in Eliot. There's something grimly realistic about it. And then the only person who gets a whole line of professorial self-assurance, there was something he said I might have challenged. That's terrible. Whenever you have a visiting speaker, afterwards people say, there was something he said I might have challenged. Well, why didn't you challenge it? This is the sort of feeling, wonderful little tensions and little spitefulnesses of a kind that remind us that Russell is rude for it. And if there were ever a group of people who just loved being spiteful about one another, the second somebody wasn't in the room, you could be quite sure they were saying something absolutely terrible about you. Virginia Woolf on Eliot, Virginia Woolf toadying to Eliot, and then Virginia Woolf very, very happy to write about Eliot's other friends and so on. So the world of, I'm not wanting to push aside what Foster says, it's all true, but what's also true is this very extraordinary submarine, the worried bodies of drowned men. Worried is, I think, exceptionally beautiful, as you're worried about the water, worried about a doctor and so on. It goes forward into the anxieties of the women in the dry salvages who are wondering whether their menfolk who live by fishing will ever come home. That's those sleepless nights of anxiety for people who are at sea. So what kind of notes might the poem need? Well, I think it needs notes, first of all, of this kind. Eliot to Foster in 1929. I only think that you exaggerate the importance of the war in this context. The war crippled me, as it did everyone else, but me chiefly because it was something I was neither honestly in nor not honestly out of. And then there's more about the war. And that, and you'll remember his attempts, we have the evidence of the letters, his attempts to work in intelligence or in fact something naval to do in the service of the war, with a very, very strong sense of what Henry James had done. Henry James's greatest tribute, greatest honouring of England being, or Britain being his choosing British citizenship because of the war. They explicit about that. And it is strange, that gap. It was strange being in Boston in two years ago, where the start of the Great War was being celebrated by a nation which wasn't in it. That is, 1914, no, 1915, no, 1916, no, not till 1917. And the gap between the sinking of a great ship and the entry of America into the war was a direct consequence of Germany changing its mind about whether it would have any ban on the sinking of civilian ships. So there's a public announcement that the new war policy is different, and that precipitates the entry of the United States in 1917. So it's a poem. It's rather wonderful to be talking about it in this room, which is clearly ordinarily used by the Security Council of the United States. I was writing across something which says Ruritania, whatever country you're representing today. It's a poem about international relations. It's a poem about war and peace. It's a poem about paradoxes by which, where Eliot lives, the war is on. Where Russell visits, the war is not on, despite casualties, death by water, all of that. So it would partly be correspondence between Eliot and Foster. You're quite right about this, I only think, and so on. It'll partly be notes about Eliot's relations with Russell. He decides that Russell isn't big enough actually to be evil, but it's a criticism by him that Russell is not big enough to be evil. That is, as you know, Eliot preferred active evil to to mere atrophy and non-existence. He describes Russell late as one of those successful failures. That is, the humanly, and at a certain point as a philosopher, as a political philosopher, he's famous for success, but he's no longer a success within those worlds. If I just remind you about the dates, March 1914, he meets Russell, who's teaching at Harvard and so on. Eliot then moves to Merton College, Oxford, 1914 to 1915. July 1914, he's on his way to Germany. And he comes back from Germany in August 1914. So, Great War is July 1914 on. The submarine war, and he runs into Russell in London in 1914. German submarine sinking the Lusitania is May 1915. July 1915, Eliot visits, sails to the United States, July 15. Mr. Apollinax is written late 1915. It's published in poetry September 1916, and then it's collected in 1917 in Proof and Other Observations. So it has, like a lot of Eliot's poems, it has reappearances, each of which, though his isn't a performing art, to go back to John's kindly mentioning Bob Dylan, Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot fighting in the captain's tower while Calypso singers laugh at them and fishermen hold flowers. Not any question about what Eliot means to Dylan, and Dylan comes up with that lovely Eliotic distortion. April or so is a cruel month. Why can't you say April or so? I can say I'll see you at 11 in the morning or so. Why can't I say I'll see you in April or so? What happens to these temporal units that means that the violation of the rhythm feels very like what Eliot does with When Lovely Woman Stoops to Folly, and etc. Move on from that. So this is something like the story. 1916, just before, between writing Apollinax and publishing it, Eliot plans to cross for the doctorate. He's going to cross the. He's going to visit Humanities to pick up his doctorate, but it's cancelled at the last moment, and it's cancelled largely because of all the family fears about submarines. So we've got perhaps more notes than you altogether need, and the edition has been mocked, not quite ridiculed, mocked for having an inordinate ratio, as if we all know somehow that there is some divine ratio. You should have an inch of poems to a foot of notes. Stop that, something's gone badly, excuse me. So there's a certain amount of that kind of stuff. But so 1915, he writes to his father the night before I sail. So he's married Vivian. And Vivian is, of course, important irrespective of whether Bertrand Russell had an affair with her. She's important because she is an object of Russell's priapic concern. Those pointed ears, those fawns are dangerous. And not only in Hawthorne are they dangerous. Callous joke by Eliot in August 1915 writes to Conrad Aiken from Gloucester, Massachusetts, I hear you have plunged into the Atlantic, meaning being published in that periodical. It's on the edge of very bad taste in a way in which a lot of good things and a lot of bad things. On the edge of bad taste. My address will be care of Bertie Russell. He's lending us his flat for a time. Us is slightly dicey. Vivian declines to accompany Eliot to America because of fear of submarines. He writes to his father in 1916. There are some signs of war even in this remote western country, a torpedo boat, motorboat looking at submarines. Eliot's mother writes to Russell in 1916. Now, let me just say, Jim McCue and I decided that we would often quote things that are later than the poem. That is, there are gains and losses in that. It's largely a matter of tact, not only in the editors, but in the receiver of the editorial notes, what to do with that. Eliot has a way of being haunted in his prose as well as in his poetry by the earlier things that he had written. And this case of a poem which is written in 1915 but not published till 1916 and not collected till 1917, it's as if it has various spectral existences during that period. So he writes to his father in 1916. Eliot's mother writes to Russell, 1916, 8 weeks after a cross-channel steamer torpedo. It was natural you should feel as you did with the awful tragedy of the Sussex. I'm sure your influence, this is to Russell, Eliot's mother, I'm sure your influence in every way will confirm my son in his choice of philosophy as a life work. Well, what it confirmed Eliot in was the belief that non-Christianity was a big mistake. That is why I am not a Christian, precipitated Eliot's decision to be a Christian. Eliot's very, very clear about how much he owed Bertrand Russell as happily counterproductive. All those bad arguments clinched it for Eliot. I have absolute faith about her son. I have absolute faith in his philosophy, but not in the vers libre. That one gave the phrase at that point. Diseases, foreigners. She said about your being in Paris, the very words give me a chill. Wonderful mother looking after son, venturing into decadent places. Decadent? Yes, and also. Tom is very grateful to you for your sympathy and kindness. 1917, just before it gets into Prufrock, I do not quite like to trust the fruit of so much labour, that is his doctoral dissertation, to the submarines. But perhaps I can move on. Very, very well aware, as Empson was, when Empson talks about the anxiety with which he sent the structure of complex words by mail back from the Far East. He says, you remember, he says that it was his nunc dimittis, that had he died in the 50s, that he would have done what he was sent to the planet to do, but this terrible fear of consigning it to the mails. So that's one dimension of the context for it. The other one is, of course, Russell at Harvard himself, later he recalls what it was like there. I had a postgraduate class of 12 who used to come to tea with me once a week. One of them was T.S. Eliot, who subsequently wrote a poem about it called Mr. Apollinax. Russell misspells Mr. Apollinax. People do that to show that he didn't come home to them. F.W. Bateson and T.S. Eliot got into a quarrel about whether The Waste Land was in some ways a gay poem. This was after a piece published by John Peter, sort of legend piece and so on. Eliot, obliged to refer to Bateson, referred to him as a Mr. Bates. He then thought that wasn't effective enough, so he took Freddie Bateson's initials, which were F.W., and changed them to F.E. It became Mr. F.E. Bateson. He was very, very irritated. You'll never quite know whether that's a cognitive subconscious or a mere error as you type the thing out and so on. There's some way in which not quite getting people's names right. It was very important to Leaviston scrutiny to call Logan Pearsall Smith L.P. Smith. You sort of cut him right, and he thinks he got 3 names. L.P. Smith. It was before LPs were actually out there. And I think probably they took the measuring. So here's Russell in 1914. I'd been spending the weekend in the country at the house of Fuller of Plotinus. It was beautiful there, weather like midsummer and the trees like early spring. He has a lake and woods. Now the lake matters because it's the lake that precipitates the reference to Gautier. Gautier's poem about the German lake into which all the elves plunge, a poem called Apollonie. So Mr. Apollinax comes from Gautier's Apollonie and the drowning of the nymphs in a German lake. My French is not good. My mother was French, but my father became a Francophone almost immediately, and we were brought up with very, very little French. And I would blush in Canada to utter very bad French. And something like that. He has a lake and woods and various agreeable things. And by all the rules, he ought to be agreeable himself. They were spiteful, these people, weren't they? About somebody having just been your host. Very astute. That's Russell. By all the rules, he ought to be agreeable to himself, being good-natured and cultivated. But for some reason, I'm always saying to myself, after all, you are an ass. That's very English and very Oxford. After you are an ass. My pupil Eliot was there, the only one who was civilized, and he is ultra civilized. Knows his classics very well. Is familiar with all French literature from Villon to Villeray. That's rather good, VIL to VIL. And is altogether impeccable in his taste, but has no vigour or life or enthusiasm. He is going to Oxford, where I expect he will be very happy. And then I imagine it was during this weekend's visit or in consequence of it that T.S. Eliot wrote Mr. Apollinax. That's this is Lady of Nemrow receiving the letters. So this is that part of the story, and the other parts of the story are subsequent things that I mentioned. Bertie, because at first I admired him so much, is one of my lost illusions. He has done evil without being big enough or conscious enough to be evil. I owe him this, that the spectacle of Bertie was one contributing influence to my conversion. Of course, he had no good influence on Vivian. He excited her mentally, made her read books. Made her read books. Not terrifying book, by the way. Made her read books and become a kind of pacifist. And no doubt was flattered because he thought he was influencing her. I have tried to subdue the desire to influence anyone. Unfortunately, she found him unattractive. Now that's a really weird remark. Unfortunately, she found him unattractive. Well, it's unfortunate for Russell, but you would think it would be fortunate for Eliot, except that he wouldn't have minded having Vivian off his hands. Very fun. It's like that great misquotation by Eliot from Middleton. I loved this woman in spite of my heart. Well, the line Middleton is in spite of her. So Eliot, and that's clearly not just Vivian based, but is prompted by marital misery and so on. So these are some of the contexts. The other one I think that I just would remind you of is the goatee. I've got lots of notes on that and so on. So Jim McCue and I have about 8 or 9 pages of notes to the poem. These various contexts, they are never, as the reviewer said, sometimes complainingly, sometimes not. There are no critical notes in the sense there are no notes that do not have a point of information in. That is, I'm taking it that a scholar is somebody who knows something that you may not know. He or she had better watch it because you did know it, and it's kind of irritating to be condescended to. Or the scholar needs tact in that you may not believe it. Now you may say, I don't know, I didn't know this before, and I don't know it now because I think you've just made it up. And she said about a lot of the notes in this edition. I've just mentioned one. I will bring this into context. I've just mentioned one. I'm very pleased with the notes to politic, cautious, and meticulous. A line which begins POL, ends US, and has ONI in sequence in the course of it. Now, it's impossible to read I'm not Prince Hamlet, nor it's meant to be, without Polonius coming into your mind. It comes into everyone's mind. Independent, what one will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two. Polonius starts 2 scenes in Hamlet, and so on. So there is an immense number of ways in which Polonius is behind the arras of the line. The line stretches out, POLONIUS, politic, cautious, and meticulous, and politic is visited upon Polonius, not only because of the POL bit, because of the words. It's the most horrible, really memorable use of the word politic in literature, is the diet of words, politic words. They're reading now at him. Well, they're not actually at him yet, because he's only just been killed. Politic, and there's a good deal of Polonius that turns on the word cautious too, and not only his behaviour, but the word itself and being in terms of caution. Scenes, meticulous, and so on. So we've got a lot of notes, as it were, that try to bring together the multiplicity of the ways in which something is intimated without it being announced. So even as to be or not to be is intimated in Northern. So Polonius hangs around those lines in some way. Now, many reviewers have simply said, I'm with you to this point, but then it gets very far-fetched or that. I believe that Eliot is not only more knowledgeable than I am, but immensely more imaginative, and that it's very, very unlikely that I have come up with happily enticing, intriguing intimations that were not available to him. But they don't have to be consciously available, because you'll remember how often he speaks in terms of the best effect in his poems being one where he is surprised by people how people respond to them. And he believes that, yes, it was there, but like in acting, I didn't have to do it consciously. I did it by combination of training and instinct. So, let me read the poem again, and then we can talk about it, or indeed about anything that you want to talk about. In the light of one of Eliot's great remarks in criticism, that what we're trying to do is make the facts generalize themselves. Now, it's very beautiful. Let the facts generalize themselves will be sentimental, and make the facts into a generalization would be intimidating and the wrong kind of authority. Make the facts generalize themselves is very, very beautiful, and it's what kind of parents wish of children. An awful lot of what Eliot understands about relations between parents and children goes into how he conceives of the creations that are his poems, as of course happens for a great many writers. So, let me just read. I'll read the poem again, please. Mr. Apollinax. When Mr. Apollinax visited the United States, his laughter tinkled among the teacups. I thought of Fragilion, that shy figure among the birch trees, and of Priapus in the shrubbery, gaping at the lady in the swing. In the palace of Mrs. Flaccus, a professor chatting cheaters, he laughed like an irresponsible fetus. His laughter was submarine and profound, like the old man of the seas hidden under coral islands, where worried bodies of drowned men drift down in the green silence, dropping from fingers of surf. I looked for the head of Mr. Apollinax rolling under a chair or grinning over a screen with seaweed in its hair. I heard the beat of centaurs' hoofs over the hard turf as his dry and passionate talk devoured the afternoon. His charming man. After all, what did he... His pointed ears. He must be unbalanced. There was something he said that I might have challenged. Of Dowager Mrs. Flaccus and Professor and Mrs. Cheetah, I remember a slice of lemon and a bit of macaroon. Thank you, please ask her. Say please.
No, I'm asking you, would you like to take questions?
Yes, I'm very, yes, can't wait.
How does one go about getting a dry and passionate talk? It would seem to be, that would seem to be a competition.
Dry is like a wine, I take this. I mean, there's a horrible combination of what it is to be drowned and what it is to be dry, especially when you're given the alliteration.
Let's think of dry as dust.
Now I do think of it as, I don't like sherry, so I'm not going to pretend that. But I mean, I think of it very much as I used it as a term of approbation on student papers, but it's true they are sometimes disconcerted. I say an excellent dry point. Meaning that it has that quality of, it is completely without sentimentality, isn't that what one thinks of as dry? So it's not the same as sour, but it's en route towards its opposite is saccharine or sweet. I hear it in that prose. I hear it in, the only one who's civilized, he is ultra civilized. It's a very dry way of talking, isn't it? It's very funny and hateful, unlike other English things. I don't know whether the being funny makes it worse or sort of makes it better. I don't know,
I guess I'm just wondering what then the passionate within the dry.
Well,
Passionately.
it is. Well, you get it. I think you get it in the philosophical scenes in Beyond the Fringe. That is, they are absolutely passionate about whether or not, all that stuff about the apples, do you remember? I can't, some people know the whole of Beyond the Fringe by heart, but there's an argument, that whole argument, can you have, I do not have an apple. Can it be said that I could have an other apple? On these things. Or, I don't know, I had a friend who was a philosopher in Oxford, whose work has, since his death, become sort of popular in some rather disconcerting way. He was fascinated by whether or not, and then he would go into the examples of what, a man asleep is turned over by a tapir, seeking the warm scented leaves on which he is lying, and does not wake up. Can he be said to have had the experience of being turned over by a tapir? Now, I remember thinking, I'm so glad I'm not in philosophy. They were wonderfully clever, they're true, but just how do you put it, you make up this totally imaginary thing, and then with the immense dryness, you say, can he be said to have had? And it depends on the discrepancy between this bloody tapir, and then the kind of severity of the thinking of, well, have you go into pondering it. So that's part of what I get from dry and passionate. Philosophers are passionate. Well, are they here? Have we any philosophers in the room? Will somebody come up and ululate that? Dry ululation is all we ask. No, but the philosophers I know it seems to me to catch it, and it's also a class thing. I mean, it's very markedly a class thing. Russell is a lord, don't you know? So I think that's about it. But I've never even thought about it. It's a shame for me never to have thought of it, and I think you should be congratulated on bringing up this marginal point. Please.
If Russell is Apollinax, he represents paganism in some sense. All the references to Priapus and
Yes.
The various Greek deities.
Yes.
Is there a link between Russell and paganism on one hand and the submarine warfare on the other, or is that too much of a stretch? Is it a conservative take on America being targeted because she is not sufficiently Christian?
It's very, as one says, sometimes truthfully, very good point. The speaker is wondering what to say, and congratulations on what you said. The paganism of Hawthorne is part of the story here. You can't do the point Eliot's been not have Hawthorne, and you can't visit the United States and not have Hawthorne. And Eliot writes a lot about Hawthorne. Always he cares about Hawthorne. And I think he stays loyal to Hawthorne, whereas he doesn't stay loyal to James. He falls away from his admiration of James, and to me a great sadness. So part of it will be the strange paganism of America. It will be that. It will also take in pagan ideas of the right of gods to come and rape people. I mean, that is that it's very. Gaping is terrifically powerful and horrible, I think. Gaping at the lady in the swing means she's not wearing underwear. She's doing the gaping. I mean, there's one horrible how it turns around there, it seems to me. And you look at the paintings. We must have art historians in the room. I think we've got those presumably on the background now. That'd be right. So you've got the sense of the lady in the swing. This rather horrible voyeuristic side. Fragilion, there is no such person, but there's a strong sense. There's an important doubt as to whether it's a hard or a soft G. Eliot is fascinated by the difference between hard and soft Gs. Gerontian depends throughout on what it is that you must have hard G. Geriatric fine, but Gerontian. And that hard G goes into an immense, and it's very, very powerful in English. There's a hard G and a soft G, including in erotic respects.
So you're often here with fragile and fragile, right?
Yes, you have a feeling of fragility. You have something like that. But the turn then, the turn is into something darker, isn't it? I thought of Fragilium, that shy figure, where you go into the hard G in figure, among the birch trees, comma, and that and has a certain drumming of the fingers for me, and then you go into practice and the shrubbery gaping at the lady in the swing, where, as I say, there's a strange turn through the word gaping, and kind of ugly underwearless sort of world. I think that's something of it. Apollonian versus Dionysiac has to be a possibility. That is, if Mr. Apollinax's conduct was repeatedly, as it were, arrogant in the way in which gods and classical figures are allowed to be arrogant when it comes to women. Isn't that right? I mean, there's the new issue of Private Eye has changed in American politics. I don't see that it's the red and blue picture of Obama with hope under it and his Trump with growth. Remember it, the side by side and so on. And the rhyme that has a certain sort of power. This is something that I think your point is an excellent one. I haven't thought about it. When people made points I hadn't thought of, I always in the old days knew that they couldn't be true. But if you viewed me, you understand this apprehension. If that were an intelligent observation, I would already have made it. But I've tried and then a little bit more welcome. Thank you. Please.
So Christopher, I'd like to ask a question about how Mr. Apollinax relates to proof rock and perhaps its place in the collection. I notice with the seaweed in his hair reminds me of the end of proof rock with the mermaid suite. I wonder, it's like in proof rock we had the drawing room scene in contrast with the underwater, but here we have a drawing room scene too. But the hair, I mean, the mermaid thing is now up on ground. So
that is immediately persuasive to me, and I would expect to everybody else too. I mean, Eliot, like most of the great poets, though not quite all of them, is a trichomaniac. He's obsessed with hair, fascinated by hair. Beauty draws us with a single hair in Pope, and not only in Pope, on the Rape of the Lock, on all that whole world, and it comes, a woman's drew her long black hair out tied and fiddled with the strings. It's very, very powerful in him. I think what I might, as it would, make of your point, from my purposes, would be the old roots of things that are happening. The best Eliot poems are always both retrospective and prospective. You could say that would be true of any artist, you could say it would be true of Ibsen, be true of Browne, and so on. There's a moment in which an immense lot is gathered and an immense lot is still in store and is biding its time. And Eliot's preoccupation with never writing the same poem twice. And the collected poems is very, very slim because he would not publish anything like the same. There is nothing like the Wasteland. There's nothing like Gerontian. There's nothing like Ash Wednesday. It's very, very extraordinary consonance which sets itself against Whitman. It sets itself against another notion of more, well, not simply more American, but in some ways American notion of having all the space in the world and all the time in the world. Your deathbed edition is a long way off, and you can treat your poems as if they were a performing art and issue version after version after version of them, as it were, forever. Geoffrey Hill had some of that wish. Geoffrey started talking about the deathbed edition when he was about 20. But it certainly was long before he was able to do his deathbed edition talk. So I think, on the one hand, this poem fits very well what Foster is talking about. It belongs to Portrait of a Lady with proof rock in terms of the depth. Stay with submarine and profound. A colleague, I have a colleague of mine, Kevin Barrett, points out that if the submarine is profound, it's not as dangerous as when it isn't profound. That's the thing, submarine warfare, it's down there, the time to get scared is when it isn't down there. So the whole thing has it complicated, and the nautical scene is nothing like the Atlantic North Sea Channel. It's got sort of tropical island sort of feeling to it. So I think a lot of the best things in proof rock and other observations are en route to poems 1920. They're en route to Corbière, to dropping La Forgue and moving to Corbière. With an acknowledgement, Eliot's copy of Baudelaire is just going on the market. I don't know what they want for it, but I saw it in a catalogue. And Eliot had written against one of Baudelaire's poems, anticipates most of Corbière. This feeling that Baudelaire going into Corbière's box. So there's a shift there. Corbière means you're going away from Henry James. You're going towards Sweeney Agonistes. You're going towards poems set in brothels, which have a fierce, coarse side, and Sweeney Agonistes with fierce jazz rhythms and so on. But thank you. Please.
I have a question about critical method, and you started with that word submarine, and you're placing it in the context of 1915 and submarine warfare and Eliot's known fear of the submarine. Instantly makes sense, but it's a new observation, I take it. I gather no one has made it before.
Go on.
I'm wondering if you have any reflections. Why not? Is it a resistance to placing a poem in its original historical context?
Well, it is, well, something else. There are readings of Eliot which are fascinated by, as indeed it is fascinating, the depth of his personal psychic whims. Isn't that right? And he is, he's absolutely extraordinary. There's an extraordinary person in there, absolutely extraordinary person. The biographies haven't been able to do justice to it, partly because of the reluctance of Mrs. Eliot to allow personal material. So Jim McCue and I did not know of these very late erotic poems for Valerie until about 2 months before the book came out, when suddenly the Eliot estate said there is Valerie's own book. Jim McCue had seen something called Valerie's own book in Mrs. Eliot's. I hope this doesn't seem to be changing subject, but what I'm getting at is that there's this terrific pull of Eliot and a reading of Eliot all the time. Half of the reviews in the edition have been about, within this apparently phlegmatic banker there lurks Jack the Ripper. Nobody's quite said that, but do a girl in, and so on. So you've got some dark thought about what it is. So there's all that. That tends to have pushed aside other kinds of conflicts. He's a romantic who's attempted to become classic by self-mutilation. So the interest of that is that he castrates himself. This is sort of one old view of the more. So the fascination with his character. Secondly, the fascination in all the literary journals, the pushing aside of criticism by biography, and the pushing aside of biography by gossip. So that the book reviews, I don't know if it's true in Canada, it's certainly true in the States, except for a very few places of which the New York Review of Books is sometimes one. New York Times Book Review is largely reviews of biographies, and the biographies are largely gossip, and it's gossip by the reviewer. And it's gossip about how well I met W.H. Auden, and he didn't proposition me. You've got all this stuff going on, and nothing, you don't get any account of Auden's poems somehow. So it will partly be that. It will partly be a terrible nemesis for new criticism. My students don't know what new criticism is. They like the word new, but they rightly suspect that it's about as old as New College, Oxford. Centuries. New criticism is saying, attend to the words on the page. At the same time, it was tempted, and sometimes you don't really need to know very much other than so you've got wonderful arguments between Douglas Bush and Pierre Brooks about, do you need to know anything about Cromwell? Who? Obviously, and then the one that sort of who Oliver Cromwell is and so on. So there are various things that have come together, I think, from quite different political alliances within the profession. One is we should hold on to close reading, and we haven't got time for context. One is we shouldn't hold on to close reading because what we need is a theoretical infrastructure. Reading this poem, what is it to read? Then you've got a series of seminars on what it is to read. I have anticipated that by saying, what is it to turn? You think you can go directly to a seminar and read, not till you've had a seminar on turn. Okay, that's a whole series. There's infinite regression. So there are lots and lots of things. The accounts of Eliot tend to say he is not doing such and such. Brian Southam says the West End is not about the Great War, it's about his tormented son. Well, it is about the Great War. It is full of things which do not need allusion to the Great War, because not needing things is a big artistic accomplishment. You need to know almost nothing. You need to know the meanings of words. You don't even need to know how to read, because somebody can read a poem to you. But the question is never, do we need these things? There will be plenty for you if you know almost nothing. It's always about bonuses. But I had never thought about submarine. I think that was a sort of foolish of me. So I've read the poem lots and lots of times. But it won't quite do to think everybody else is stupid, though. One is tempted at Boston University and saying that possibility, especially his administration. Thank you, though. He and I planned the whole of the situation. Please.
So one thing that was really gaining a lot of momentum in America at this time was Freudian psychoanalysis, after Freud took things. Do you have any notes about that? No, seriously though, do you have... Does that show up in your reading at all? I'm thinking particularly of the idea of submarine in the context of psychoanalysis.
Well, my book on prejudice, on Eliot and prejudice, didn't engage with Freudian thought. And I think Eliot didn't engage with Freudian thought except on the matter of religion. So that he reviews the future of an illusion, and quite rightly given his belief, he finds it empty and arrogant. Exactly, very against it. He thinks it's very badly argued, which it mostly is, and so on and so forth. He's oddly uninterested in what, for me, are the really valuable things for literature and Freud, and particularly the antithetical sense of primal words. I mean, Eliot, like all great writers, is fascinated by the way in which a word is an axis of direction, and the very same word which means stop you from doing it means allow you to do it. When he goes to Finland, lets me, and lets has to be simultaneously prevents me from doing it and allows me to do it. And it's very, very beautiful. It catches on. The production needs to stress that the main physical sense is anybody that prevents me. May goes through, prevent, lets me. But those words, I think, are that whole area. Freud is, I think, wonderfully discerning and provocative with that. It's very short, 5 or 6 pages only. In volume 4 of the collected papers. Beckett understands those words. I shall soon be quite dead at last in spite of all. Depends on quite meaning either somewhat or altogether. These antithetical senses. The French is tout à fait mort, enfin. So there's no equivocation in the French as to what it will be to be quite dead. But as soon as it goes into Irish English, it's got this other horribly different thing that everybody in Beckett is quite dead. And it's what's in store for us, either in the Inferno or in Purgatory, that we won't be allowed to be fully dead. Do you know? So I think there are Freudian things, but I think Freud didn't matter to Eliot except as another incentive to being a Christian. You know, what any bad arguments against Christianity seem to him to mean that Christianity, it's an illogical position to take, but it seems humanly dramatic. But that's the best I can do there. Thank you. Please.
I got caught when you were reading it on the irresponsible fetus. It's such a bizarre phrase, but I was just looking at, in regard to the being surrounded by liquid, the way that he's laughing like an old man under the coral in the sea. This kind of idea of this kind of warm and wound, kind of cozy submersion in the drawing room. Not being a person who's particularly familiar with Eliot. The first thing that I was thinking of course, is Prufrock, which I think we all know, and that kind of loneliness of the crab pot sailing across the sea. Do you chart a kind of movement in this kind of submersion liquid image in the drawing room, or is it kind of run through most of Prufrock and the observations? Does it kind of morph as it goes through?
Jim McCue noticed more things than I did hereabouts. I mean, we didn't quite have a division of labour, and each of us read everything. In the end, we had each read everything, and though it wasn't as lovingly intimate as Richard Lovell Edgeworth and Maria Edgeworth, with both of them saying they couldn't remember which bits were theirs and which were, well, the wonderful, I can't remember which bits of mine, which are my father's, surely. Those to be against your father. Jim put together, we have allusions to this whole mixed feeling, deeply mixed feeling that Eliot, like everybody, has about the submarine world. Its immense luring attractiveness and the hideous discrepancy between what it would actually be like to drown and the illusion, at least, of flowing into. So evening sky in their green going, a wave interminably flowing. We're not interminable. It's very beautiful in Stevens. There's a lot in Stevens that is lured by these depths. So if you think beneath it all desire of oblivion runs, and we're laughing on that, then oblivion is wonderfully beckoning to us, I think, from drowning. And the Oxford Book of Drowning Poets will be very big. And the Oxford Book of Being Burnt Bits poems will be rather slim. That is all kinds of reasons why not being able to speak because of what drowning is. So Cooper, the poem is fascinating, walking the castaway, drank the stifling wave and sank. In the end, you've got to try to drink it. Not just have it flood you, you've got to accept that it's something. So that would seem to be part of the world of it. But I think you've got a critical idea there, which I haven't had, and would think it well worth thinking about. I mean, why are there so many great funeral elegies? Why is there a great career that and in its way over beach, and this and that? And the Wreck of the Deutschland, and you could add and add and add and add. And what is it about this way of going that seems so fascinating to people who work with words? Please.
But pick up on Tom's question in a slightly different direction. But why an irresponsible fetus? That niggled at my mind when I read it too. And you opened up worried bodies of drowned men. It was just so beautiful. I'm thinking Richard III and all of those sorts of wonderful poems. But this irresponsible fetus is this nasty, ugly simile at the beginning of the poem. Is it an aborted child? Is it a living child? Why is a fetus irresponsible? Where does that moral element, what does that latch onto?
Can I just add the question? Is it Russell? Is Russell the irresponsible fetus who's also a submarine?
A
prolific submarine.
Amniotic fluid is to the point, as of course is Alice in Wonderland throughout this poem. If you look for the head of somebody rolling like that, again, Eliot and Hugh Kenner and other people have written very well about how Lewis Carroll is in so much of the great modern people. Lewis Carroll's are everywhere in Joyce and not only because of portmanteau words, the situations again get humpier. So some of it has to do, if you think Empson is right, that all those tears, all that water in Alice is amniotic. I think there's some sort of birth, not necessarily trauma thing going on. Our note on the word irresponsible is OED1, not answerable, incapable of legal responsibility. So there's the very strong sense of what, and that will have to do with the way in which, though philosophy is not necessarily jurisprudential, but jurisprudence needs to be thinking hard about philosophy. And one of the objections that some of us have to the United States Supreme Court is that it is philosophically not up to the, again and again, not philosophically up to the task. That it's given a philosophical question of what it means to be in possession of something, you know what I mean? And then the answers are kind of wouldn't pass philosophy 101. And we feel that again and again for some of those things. We've got the note we've got on it. I spotted in Taillade, who's the French poet who Eliot cares a lot about, who's represented in the poem de Jocoui, un nommable fetus. So it's an unnameable fetus. Unnameable and certainly not yet named, really. And I've just become a great-grandfather. You're supposed to go into round of applause, don't bother. I've just become a great-grandfather. The child was so eager to meet its gramps, or great-gramps, that it came into the world too early. And it's therefore unnameable still. That is, there was the feeling we've got another 8 or 10 weeks before we've got to come up with a name. But responsibility is, I think irresponsible fetus is from innommable in the French. And that rhymes in Taillade with rictus, which is of course a Greek. So fetus and rictus are the rhymes in French. And laughed like, is prompted partly by the French poet. And we've got various notes of this man. He gets very angry with poetry Chicago because they drop the line. There's the question that he's angry with Harriet Monroe for doing that, and Pound is angry and so on. But we don't have, I think your point is very good, we don't have a sufficient note. We've got simply Eliot, exercise of the irresponsible activity of a legal mind. Where Eliot in his prose is bringing irresponsible and legal together and saying it is irresponsible of the legal world not to have thought through the question of whether or not you are responsible for. But it isn't a good answer to your question. It's funny about the word fetus. You find it actually ugly.
Disturbing, yeah.
Well, it is disturbing. Yes.
Maybe it's because I've listened to you speak about the lust in the poem and the death in the poem. And so to put something so helpless, so unnameable alongside that, maybe it's in the context of your wonderful talk that I find it ugly.
Well, I'm sure that it is unique in its register in the poem. So you have to, it has an immense charge, and it has an immense, that wasn't meant to be like a depth charge thing, but there is a depth to it, as there is to no other work. It's a little bit like, we can contrast it with Yeats and what he does with the word declivity. I offer to love's play my dark declivities. And declivities is just, it's so completely different a register from anything else in that amatory poem. It's really weird. It feels I find it very scary. I mean, if a woman were to say to me, you're interested in my declivities, I would back nervously away. Something like the kind of prosaic limpidity of that, exactly. But I'm entirely agree with you, really. Please.
I'm sorry to keep on this irresponsible fetus thing, but because you already sort of said,
how you talk about it in the book. Mine just very basic reading of it is, wouldn't an irresponsible fetus be a fetus that opens its mouth? If it's still, and as Tom says, if it's still, growing, if it's still surrounded by amniotic fluid, if it opens its mouth, then it is irresponsible, drowns in the womb. And so I was wondering if that was that kind of way of reading, almost a way of saying he talks, Mr. Apollinax talks too much, or says too much.
I think that is a very deep aspect. It would have to do with the relation of responsibility to response. And Eliot, like all great writers, is interested in the relation between those two. That is, in Greens we get responsibilities in Yeats. The whole question of what I happened to be grading papers yesterday, first thing this morning. Students somehow believe that if it's a production, they don't have any responsibility as to their own imaginings. If they're reading the book, then their responsibility for their responses is very clear to them. If they're watching it on stage, they've been absolved of responsibility. Now, to me, they now have a responsibility for their responses to this other person's imagining of it. So they have a way, my students have a way of saying, you don't have to do much imagining if you're watching a production. But actually, you've got meta-imagining going on. You've got not only to imagine Hamlet, but you've got to imagine, Bill Murray's Polonius. And Bill Murray's Polonius, I think, is very, very good. As I thought that in the Zeffirelli, the production of the Mousetrap was very, very good. If somebody's been done with them, they're relieved of responsibility. Now, the way in which the responsibility of a fetus might have to do with the responses that a fetus, which are very, very marked in ultrasound, like the responses in the stark cavern. But I think that's how the thought that, just to stay with watery one, the thought that a line of poetry or a moment, phrase in a poem is like a stone and it ripples out. Where it ripples, how many ripples, how far it ripples, is not going to be provable. It's very hard even to give good grounds for thinking. It doesn't get that far. But Eliot cares a lot that an infant is a creature of dark fact. That is, the negativity of infants is very, very important. That is, the word unable to speak a word. So infant is a very, very powerful word for him because it, like innocence, it's a negative, has a negative prefix and it's hugely positive. Infancy. Please, you were going to say something.
Yes. I'm going to take this question about Beckett. Just practice with that. So I'm interested in sort of the idea of time in this poem. There seems to be an anticipatory quality to it, but it's also Mr. Apollinax visited in the past tense. The fetus is that which is anticipated but not yet born, but that is, there's this sort of temporal shift in the poem. The drowned men drift down, that's present tense. And then the idea at the end where the talk has happened and people are kind of gossiping about it after that. So I'm wondering about, you said that Eliot, his work is haunted by his previous work, anticipates his work after the fact. So I'm wondering if you can speak to the temporality of the poem in itself, not in sort of the context, but what you make of the nature of time.
That feels entirely true to me. It involves transatlantic relations. Right. That is, the context of somebody visiting the States, like my visiting Canada now. I'm not going to stay Canada, I've made friends in Canada, but I'm really visiting it. And what is absolutely clear is that Russell, from his position within English society and from his position within opposition to the Great War, it matters. For instance, Jim and I even flirt with a sort of pun on what a conch is and what a conch is. Then there's a terrific all about shells and conches whenever Eliot's near a shore. And it doesn't happen very much that Russell, of course, is opposed to the war. That is, the story is that somebody's willing to go to jail to fight against the Great War, and the submarine thing isn't going to choose. It's not going to choose who to sink. But I think that you're right. Visited, I hadn't properly thought of this. It has, Eliot did not visit Britain. He settled in Europe. He settled immediately into Europe and believed, as it were, that it had been weird and a bit of a mistake for the Eliots ever to leave Somerset. They very couldn't get that back. It's so the James thing, but I'm sure that you're right. I hadn't thought about the bit in macaroon. The macaroon is not eaten. It's bit, and it catches us that curious way. You look around the table and there's this, there's a little bit of wine left in the glass. There's a slice of lemon that might be one. So that feeling of it being poised in some way, and it's poised, of course, with Eliot not very much would be a possible. He didn't get the doctorate because he was afraid of the submarines in part. He didn't really want the doctorate. We are glad he didn't get the doctorate. The idea that he would have become a Harvard person through and through, with his whole life going on and on about F.H. Bradley, whom he would increasingly have found unsatisfactory. So the antagonism between philosophy and poetry is very profound in him. The work is better done in two heads. Don't try to be a philosophical. Work's been done. So I think you're completely right. That's a rather long-winded expression of gratitude. Please.
Yes, a comment and a question. The comment is on fetus, and I must say that whenever I see that here, I think of Beardsley. And the fetus figures in Beardsley appropriate to this whole 1890s kind of decadence, bacchanalian feeling of the poem. And Beardsley comes up elsewhere in Eliot and the Wasteland and the woman at the dressing table, and I think of Beardsley's illustrations of hope and so on. So that's simply a suggestion on the fetus thing. But Channing Cheetahs hasn't gotten a comment yet, and it strikes me as a very rich kind of concocted name.
Yes.
And Channing, of course, goes back to Eliot's antipathy to New England transcendentalism, which was his mother's thing. And Cheetahs is, well, I can't help thinking there must be a lot of post-colonial comment on that. So I wonder if you could elaborate.
Well, the word features is for me profoundly an aphrodisiac. That is, I think, as soon as you say features, my incipient sexual desires go. Yeah, I think it's a deeply aphrodisiac word, and the thought for most people is actually not it's wonderful to get children, and I'm pleased to have got 7. Nevertheless, the word fetus, even more than the word embryo, I have a curious dampening effect. Loved ones, if you're really trying to excite her, you don't say, terrifically look forward to your having a fetus. Any chance of a fetus as a result of what we're about. It's a profound, it's not an asexual word, it's an aphrodisiac word, I think. It's not the greatest aphrodisiac moment in which she is. Sorry, I'm going on slightly, but I'm only going to see you once. There's a love scene in one of Abe's novels where the woman says to him, I desire you utterly. And the funny about that phrasing is thinks to himself, one more corking coppericler like that, and he was done. There's this vision in the summer season when soft was the sun, she says. No, you don't need Langland, please, darling. No Pierce Brosnan. Sort of put a band on it. So there's something about the word. This goes back. There's a chill that it strikes. It's quite different. It's not priapic as a word at all. You know, if we're going to link the various things in the poem. The names, what's wonderful is the way in which the Channing Cheetahs get locked back to being just cheetah. By the end of the poem, that double barrel thing, German, huge class dimension. The double-barreled name has sort of power as a double-barrel. Can have more power. It works partly through the double-barreled name. The cheetah, I think it is like the couch Brazilian jaguar. Big cats for Eliot, and indeed small cats, are very erotically charged. Is that right? So there's something, now the discrepancy, what we all know is that professors have no id at all. And there's a good book by Nuttall, isn't it, about scholars and how they're dead and labelled down. If you want to be a scholar, it's just this small price you have to pay. So it's sort of rather, these people don't feel sexy at all, or sexually driven. They're Chinese cheaters. Mrs. Flaccus is a wonderful name because it's a combination of phallus and being flaccid. So the name is itself a symbolic detumescence. Discuss. And of course, it's a very good classical, to go back to your excellent point about classics, it's a very good classical name. But within it's an American name, and we've got one of our notes that we will very pleased with. It's this, which I sorry. This is a reminder of the social world. Pittsburgh Press, 1910. Mrs. Flack, just great newspaper. Mrs. Flaccus, spell FL, which brings it much closer to flaccid. Mrs. Flaccus names age for smart tea. Prettily appointed event to be given next Friday afternoon at her home. Mrs. Charles L. Flaccus, who has cards out for a tea to be given next Friday afternoon, has chosen as her aides for the affair Mrs. H. Fred Mercer, Mrs. Newton Chapin, Mrs. George Bliss. Remind you that the wives all have the husband's first names and so on. Miss and on. The hours are from 4 to 6 o'clock, and the appointments will be handsome and artistic. There is no special guest. Okay. So that's the sort of world that you visit. That's the world of the teapots. At 1910, there's no reason to think that Eliot knows that either himself. But he knows very well that Flaccus is an American name, trailing some of these etymological patterns or suggestions and trailing the classical world of it. What was I pretending to answer? What was it? I can't remember where it is.
Chinese cheetah.
Channing cheetah, the name?
Yes,
the
name Channing Cheetah.
That's what I did. Well, watch for the bit. You think that wonderful move in one of the 1920 poems, the couch Brazilian jaguar compels the subtle efforts of baptism. Grishkin has a maisonette. These choices. If you want to seduce something in the animal creation, you can either have this wonderful smell going with you in the sense of the jungle, or you can own a maisonette. It's very extraordinary how it works. And the word maisonette feels both French and not French at all. So it's perfect reading of the French habits in maisonette. How about?
One more ask he devours, tiger.
Yes.
That would be religious, I assume.
Yes, I think exceptions are sometimes made for tigers. See Blake. I'm tiring you out, and you can perhaps tiring me. Would anybody like to say some last good thing? Not true from last good thing. Sure. You're going to say it, John.
Unless there are any more questions, I'll just say thank you very much for an absolutely wonderful report. So, thank you.